She exposed her husband's secret live on Family Feud. Steve Harvey shut everything down. Nobody warned the producers what was about to come out of her mouth. Nobody could have. The question on the board was, name something a person hides from their spouse. Donna Jean Mercer stood at the podium in a cream-colored blazer she had pressed 3 times the morning of the taping, and she looked at that question, and something crossed her face. Something fast and private and too complicated for a studio audience to read, and then she pressed the buzzer and said, one word, everything. Steve Harvey turned to look at her. The audience laughed. The easy laugh of people who think they understand what they're watching. The board lit up. Everything was not on the board. Steve shook his head with a smile and started to move on, the way hosts move on. And that was the moment Donna Jean Mercer stopped being a contestant and started being something else entirely. Wait, she said into the microphone. I'm not being funny. Donna Jean was 57 years old, and she had been married to Earl Mercer for 31 years. She was from Dothan, Alabama, a town of 68,000 people in the Wiregrass region, where her family had lived for 4 generations, where everybody knew everybody's name and the worst thing you could do to a person was embarrass them publicly. She had grown up understanding this as a kind of gospel. Keep the hard things inside the house, and inside the house you handle them quietly, and you do not, under any circumstances, let the outside world see the weight your family carries. She had lived by this so completely for so long that the version of herself she had given the world for 3 decades was a nearly perfect performance. She was the woman at church who brought the extra casserole. She was the one who remembered everybody's birthday and the names of everybody's grandchildren and what kind of pie their mother had preferred before she passed. She smiled the way people smile when they have decided, somewhere early in life, that the smile is load-bearing, that if it slips, something structural collapses. The thing Donna Jean had been hiding was not a small thing. It had started 7 years ago, in the fall of 2016, when Earl, who drove long-haul routes for a freight company out of Birmingham, came home from a 3-week run with a cough that didn't leave. She had told him to go to the doctor. He had told him to go again. He had told her he was fine. This went on for 5 months, which is one of the ways people who love each other sometimes hurt each other without meaning to, by protecting themselves from the information that would require them to act. In March of 2017, Earl's company required a medical clearance for recertification of his commercial license. The results of the required physical came back with numbers that sent the examining physician straight to the phone. Earl Mercer had type 2 diabetes that had been unmanaged for, the doctor estimated, based on the markers, at least 3 years. His A1C was 10.4. His blood pressure was 158 over 97. He had peripheral neuropathy, beginning in both feet, which explained the way he had been walking since the previous autumn, in a way that Earl had attributed to bad boots. The doctor told him he could not legally clear him to drive. Earl Mercer, who had been behind the wheel of a truck for 26 years, who had put 2 children through college on that license, whose entire identity was organized around the fact that he could go anywhere and come back with something to show for it. Earl Mercer lost his commercial driving certification on a Tuesday afternoon in March and drove home in his personal truck and sat in the driveway for 2 hours before he came inside. It did not tell Donna Jean what the doctor had found. It told her the company had changed their insurance requirements and that things were being sorted out. He told her this for 11 days, while she watched him move around the house differently. Slower, quieter, with the particular stillness of a man who is trying to keep a building from falling by standing very carefully in the middle of it. It was their daughter Simone who noticed first. She was 26 and had her mother's instinct for the temperature of a room. She called Donna Jean on a Wednesday night and said very carefully, "Mama, is Daddy sick?" Donna Jean said what she had been told to say. She said things were fine, that Earl was just tired from the road, that Simone shouldn't worry. She sighed this while sitting in the bathroom with the door locked and the fan running so Earl wouldn't hear the call, because by day 11, Earl had told her. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table where they had eaten 31 years of meals, and he had slid the papers across to her, and he had not been able to look at her face while she read. Them. And Donna Jean had read the numbers. 10.4, 158 over 97. Peripheral neuropathy, and she had felt the floor shift the way it only shifts when something you thought was permanent reveals itself to be provisional. She had reached across the table and taken his hand. She had not cried in front of him. Not once, in the 4 years that followed, did she let him see her cry about it. She cried in the car, in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly on Ross Clark Circle, sitting in a Buick Le Sabre that needed new brake pads, with a grocery list in her lap that now had to be reorganized around a diabetic diet. She had researched for 16 hours on her laptop before she felt confident enough to begin. She cried after Sunday services, in the third stall of the women's restroom, for as long as she needed to. She did not consider this dishonesty. She considered it maintenance, the ongoing work of keeping herself functional so she could keep Earl functional, the same way you don't tell the bridge it's under strain. For 4 years after Earl's diagnosis, Donna Jean held two jobs. Her regular work, she was the office manager at an orthodontic practice, and the invisible second job of managing a household, reorganized entirely around a disease that does not announce itself dramatically, but instead takes things slowly, incrementally, in the way that feels manageable right up until it doesn't. She adjusted every recipe in the house. She drove Earl to 17 medical appointments in the first year alone, and sat in waiting rooms for a cumulative 63 hours. Always with a book she didn't read, always with her phone face down so she could think without interruption, always projecting the mild patience of a woman who is simply accompanying her husband to a routine appointment rather than the concentrated terror of a woman calculating how many years they had left, to feel with the ordinary things that make a life feel like a life. She calculated it sometimes. She was not proud of this. In the parking lots, after the appointments, before she turned the key and became composed again, she would do the math on the risk factors, the averages, the trajectories, and she would sit with the number for as long as she could stand it before she put it away. The lie she told most consistently was not about Earl's health. That had become, over 4 years, too known within the family to fully conceal. The lie she told was about herself. When people asked how she was holding up, she said fine. When her sister Carolyn offered to fly down from Memphis to help, Donna Jean told her they had it handled. When her pastor suggested the church's caregiver support group, she smiled and said she was managing well. And maybe later, when things settled, and things never settled, and she never went. She had not told a single person outside her immediate family how frightened she was. Not once, in 4 years. The fear lived entirely inside her, in the parking lots, and the locked bathrooms, and the 16-hour research sessions that started as practical and became compulsive and ended at 2 a.m., with Donna Jean sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, reading studies she was not qualified to interpret, trying to find the outcome she could live with. Her grandson Marcus was 8 years old when he crawled into her lap at the kitchen table, one of those late nights, and pressed his ear against her chest the way children do when they are listening. For something they can't name, she asked him what he was doing. He said he was checking if she was okay. She held him for a long time without speaking, and she told herself it was fine, and she told herself she was managing, and she prayed the one prayer she had been praying for 4 years. Who's let me be strong enough for one more day? The Mercer family had applied for Family Feud because Simone had filled out the form during a particularly difficult January 2 months after Earl's second hospitalization. She told her parents it would be fun, something to look forward to. She sided with the practiced lightness of a daughter who has watched her mother perform lightness for her entire adult life and has learned the technique. Donna Jean had agreed. She had smiled. She had meant it. Partly, there were 5 of them on stage: Donna Jean, Earl, who had lost 41 pounds over 3 years of managed treatment and stood straighter than he had in a decade; Simone, and 2 of Donna Jean's cousins, Bertrand and June, who had driven up from Dotan in a minivan and brought enough food for a week. The family they played against was the Nguyen's from Houston, loud, joyful 3 generations deep, with matching jackets and a grandmother who had already made Steve Harvey laugh twice during the warm-up. The game moved fast. The Nguyen family was sharp and quick, the kind of team that communicates in shorthand, developed over shared tables and shared history. The Mercers matched them point for point through the first 2 rounds, Earl answering questions with a relaxed confidence that made Donna Jean glance at him sideways more than once. The glance of someone who spent 4 years afraid and is still not entirely accustomed to the version of him that came out the other side. It was late in the second round. The board turned to name something a person hides from their spouse when Donna Jean pressed the buzzer and said everything, and the audience laughed, and Steve started to move on. And Donna Jean said, "Wait, I'm not being funny." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey stopped. He looked at her the way he looks when the show has become something other than the show, and he said gently, "Then tell me what you mean." Donna Jean set her hands on the podium. She was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone deciding whether to speak, but the silence of someone who has been quiet for so long that beginning feels like learning to walk. "I hid from my husband for 4 years how scared I was," she said. "He was sick, and I was terrified, and I never once let him see it because I thought it would make it worse. And I don't know if that was right. I still don't know." She looked at Earl. Earl Mercer had not moved. "I hid it from everybody," Donna Jean said. "I was so busy taking care of him that I forgot to tell him I needed taking care of too." The studio fell completely silent again. Longer this time. The kind of silence that only happens when an audience of 200 people all decide at the same moment to stop performing their own reactions and simply feel what is in the room. Errol crossed the stage in 5 steps. He put his arms around his wife and he held her, and she let him. And the thing that made people watching later describe this as the moment they lost composure was not the embrace itself, but the sound, or rather the absence of sound. The fact that Donna Jean Mercer, who had been crying in locked bathrooms and parking lots for 4 years, cried on that stage in front of everyone, openly, with her face not hidden. And Earl held her and said something close to her ear that the microphones didn't catch. The crew didn't try to hide what was happening at their stations. The stage manager, a woman who had worked on the show for 11 years, later described it as the moment she understood why she'd chosen her job. Steve Harvey stood at center stage and did not speak for a long time. But Steve wasn't done. He walked to where the Mercer stood, and he waited until Donna Jean had collected herself, not rushed her, not prompted her. Hust stood there with the patience of a man who knows that some moments should not be managed. Then he turned to Earl. "Sir," he said, "did you know?" Earl shook his head once. "She never let me see it," he said. 31 years, and I never saw her scared. Not once." He paused. "I should have looked harder." The studio fell completely silent for the third time. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the Nguyen family, who had moved quietly to one side of the stage and were watching with the kind of respectful attention that made it clear they understood what kind of moment this had become. Mrs. Nguyen, 64, the family matriarch, stepped forward without being invited and walked to Donna Jean and took her hand and said, in the straightforward way of someone who has no interest in performance, "You are not alone. Not today." Steve Harvey pressed his hand against his chest. He walked to center stage and faced the cameras directly. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home," he said, and his voice had moved entirely out of television and into something else. "Caregivers. I'm talking to the caregivers, the ones who are strong in the parking lots because they can't afford to be strong anywhere else. I see you, and I need you to hear me. You are allowed to put the weight down. Just for a minute. You are allowed." He turned back to Donna Jean. "Thank you for saying it out loud," he said, "because there is somebody watching this right now who needed to hear exactly what you just said." The episode aired 9 weeks later. In its first 48 hours online, the clip of Donna Jean's "Wait, I'm not being funny" moment accumulated 6.1 million views. By the end of the second week, it had reached 31 million views across platforms, trending in 14 countries, and had been shared more than any other Family Feud clip in the show's digital history. The hashtag number allowed to put it down reached the top 10 nationally for 6 days. 6 months later, a caregiver advocacy organization called Donna Jean and asked if she would record a video message for their annual awareness campaign. She agreed. She recorded it in her kitchen, without notes. In one take, the same kitchen where she had sat in the dark for 4 years. The video was viewed 2.4 million times in its first month and was used in caregiver orientation materials by 31 hospital systems across 11 states. A year after the episode aired, Donna Jean joined the caregiver support group at her church, the one her pastor had mentioned years before. She attends every Thursday at 6 p.m. She has brought 11 other people through those doors since she first walked in. She is not the one who brings the casserole anymore. She is the one who sits next to the newest person and says simply, "It's okay to say how hard it is. We're all here." El Mercer's most recent A1C was 6.8. He does not drive long haul anymore, but he takes Donna Jean on weekend drives through the wiregrass. No destination, no schedule. The way they used to when they were first married and didn't have anywhere they needed to be. Today, when Donna Jean sits at the kitchen table early in the morning, Marcus, now 10, still sometimes comes down and climbs into her lap. She lets him. She doesn't perform composure for him the way she used to. She lets him hear her breathe. She lets him see that she is tired sometimes and fine anyway. He presses his ear against her chest the way he always has, and she lets him hear everything that's actually there. Some people carry fear the way they carry love. Silently, completely, without asking for anything in return. Donna Jean Mercer walked onto a game show stage with 31 years of quiet courage and 4 years of hidden terror. And the most powerful thing she did was not win a round or answer a question. It was stop performing long enough to say, "This has been heavy. It has been heavy. And I have been carrying it, and I am ready to put it down." She came to that studio with a perfectly pressed blazer and a smile she had been wearing for decades. She left having said the truest thing she had said in 4 years. The blazer was the same. Everything else was different. If you know a caregiver who needs to hear that they don't have to carry it alone, send them this, not the clip. This. And if stories like Donna Jean's matter to you, subscribe. We find the ones that remind you what people are made of.